The Whispering Malice, the abandoned psychiatric hospital, loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to forgotten suffering. Its broken windows stared down at the Blizzard group as they approached through the driving rain, each footstep echoing with unnatural resonance against the cracked pavement. Fubuki pulled her emerald coat tighter around her shoulders, her breath forming ghostly plumes in the suddenly frigid air. Something was wrong here. She could feel it in the way the shadows seemed to writhe and pulse, as if the very darkness were alive and watching. "Hell's Fubuki," Mountain Ape called out, his massive frame barely visible through the downpour. "Are you certain about this intel? This place feels cursed." Eyelashes finished, his voice barely above a whisper. The usually confident Esper clutched his psychic batons with white knuckles, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Fubuki's green eyes narrowed as she surveyed the structure. The Hero Association's report had been sparse. Civilians in the surrounding area had begun exhibiting signs of severe psychological distress, turning on friends and family with inexplicable violence. The common thread: they had all reported hearing whispers in the nights leading up to their breakdowns. "The monster is in there," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her the leadership of the Blizzard group. "And we're going to eliminate it before it spreads its influence any further." As they crossed the threshold into the hospital's main lobby, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The walls were covered in a strange, organic-looking mold that seemed to pulse with its own bioluminescent glow. Ancient medical equipment lay scattered across the floor, twisted into impossible shapes as if reality itself had been warped. "Stay close," Fubuki commanded, raising her hand as telekinetic energy began to swirl around her fingers. "And whatever you hear, whatever you feel, remember, we are the Blizzard group. We stand together." The first whisper came as they reached the central stairwell. "Fubuki, why do they follow you?" The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It seemed to emanate from the very air itself, carrying with it the weight of ancient malice. Fubuki felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature creep up her spine. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered, her twin pigtails trembling. "Hear what?" Mountain Ape rumbled, but his eyes darted nervously around the corridor. "They don't respect you, you know. They fear you. There's a difference." Fubuki's jaw tightened. She had heard it clearly now. And the worst part was the grain of truth buried within the poison. Her telekinetic aura flared brighter, casting dancing shadows on the mold-covered walls. "It's starting," she murmured. "The enemy is here. It feeds on discord, on the cracks in our relationships. Don't listen to anything you hear that isn't spoken aloud." But even as she spoke, she could see the effect beginning to take hold. Eyelashes was staring at her with an expression she had never seen before: calculation, resentment, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Tell me, Hell's Fubuki," the voice continued, now seeming to come from Eyelash's direction. "How many of your followers have you led to their deaths in your quest for recognition?" "That's not," Fubuki began. But Eyelashes stepped back, his batons raised defensively. "Is it true?" he demanded, his voice strained. "All those missions, all those risks, were they really necessary? Or did you just want to prove you could surpass your sister?" The words hit Fubuki like a physical blow. The comparison to Tatsumaki was her deepest insecurity, the wound that never quite healed, but she forced herself to remain calm, to think clearly despite the psychic pressure building in her skull. "That's not me talking," she said firmly. "That's the monster. It's manipulating your emotions, your thoughts. Fight it, fight it." The whisper was closer now, seeming to come from inside her own head. "Or embrace it. They all know the truth, that you're weak, that you'll never be anything more than the lesser sister, the failed Esper who has to rely on others to feel strong." Around her, the Blizzard group was beginning to fracture. Mountain Ape had turned to face Lily, his massive fists clenched. "You've always thought you were better than us, haven't you? Just because you can manipulate people's minds doesn't make you special." "I never," Lily started, tears streaming down her face. "Enough!" Fubuki's voice cut through the growing chaos like a blade. Her telekinetic power exploded outward, not to attack, but to create a barrier of swirling air around each member of her team. "This is exactly what it wants. It feeds on our discord, grows stronger when we turn against each other." So perceptive, the voice purred. And now it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But perception and power are different things, aren't they?" The mold on the walls began to shift and flow, forming humanoid shapes that stepped free from the surface. They were perfect mirrors of the Blizzard group members, but wrong in subtle ways. Their eyes held cruel intelligence, their smiles were too wide, their movements too fluid. "Shadow puppets," Fubuki breathed, recognizing the technique. "It's not just manipulating our emotions, it's creating physical manifestations of our inner darkness." The shadow version of herself approached, moving with predatory grace. When it spoke, it was with her voice, but filled with venom and self-loathing. Look at them, Shadow Fubuki said, gesturing to the team. Look how easily they turn on each other. This is what you've built, a group held together by fear and ambition, not loyalty. When the pressure comes, they'll abandon you just like everyone else. That's not true, Fubuki replied, but her voice wavered. Around her, the other shadow versions were engaged in battle with their originals, and she could see her team struggling not just with the physical threat, but with the emotional manipulation that came with it. Shadow Mountain Ape was goading the real Mountain Ape with whispers about his perceived intellectual inadequacy. Shadow Eyelashes taunted his counterpart about his desperate need for approval. Each battle was as much psychological as physical. You know what your real fear is, the omnipresent voice continued. It's not that you're weak, it's that you're ordinary. Just another B-class hero who will be forgotten the moment she's gone. Fubuki felt the familiar surge of anger and self-doubt, but this time she did something different. Instead of fighting it or suppressing it, she acknowledged it. You're right, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite the chaos around her. The admission seemed to surprise even the shadows who paused in their attacks. I am afraid of being ordinary. I am afraid of being forgotten. I am afraid that I'll never measure up to Tatsumaki. Her telekinetic aura began to shift, becoming less wild and more focused. But that fear doesn't define me, it doesn't control me. She looked at each member of her team, seeing past their struggles with their shadow selves to the people beneath. Mountain Ape, you're not just strong, you're loyal. You've stood by me when others would have fled. Eyelashes, your need for approval comes from your desire to protect others. Lily, your empathy is what makes you powerful, not a weakness to be exploited. Pretty words, the voice hissed, but it sounded less certain now. But words are the beginning of understanding, Fubuki interrupted, her power now flowing in controlled streams toward each of her teammates. Not to control them, but to support them, and understanding is the enemy of fear. The shadow versions flickered as her team began to rally. Mountain Ape grabbed his shadow self by the throat, his voice booming with newfound confidence. I know who I am. I'm not the smartest, but I'm smart enough to know who's worth following. Eyelashes crossed his batons, creating a barrier of psychic energy that pushed his shadow back. I don't need approval from a reflection of my own insecurities. One by one, the shadow versions began to dissolve, their forms becoming insubstantial as the emotional energy that sustained them was withdrawn. But the voice wasn't finished. The hospital itself began to shake, and the mold on the walls pulsed with angry red light. If I cannot divide you, then I will simply destroy you all together. The building's structure began to warp and twist, corridors becoming impossible geometries that hurt to look at. The very air became thick and oppressive, filled with the psychic weight of accumulated suffering. It's not just feeding on discord, Fubuki realized, her eyes widening. It's been feeding on the pain and despair of everyone who ever suffered in this place. All the patients, all the staff, their negative emotions have been stored here, concentrated. The entity revealed itself then, rising from the floor in a writhing mass of shadow and malevolent energy. It had no fixed form, constantly shifting between shapes that suggested different types of suffering. Sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes geometric patterns that induced vertigo and nausea. I am every fear, it spoke with the voices of the dead, every doubt, every moment of despair. You cannot defeat what you carry within yourselves. Maybe not, Fubuki said, stepping forward, but we don't have to. She reached out with her telekinetic power, but instead of attacking, she began to do something far more difficult. She began to gather the scattered emotions of her team, not to suppress them, but to harmonize them. Fear is part of being human, she said, her voice growing stronger. Doubt is part of growth. Despair is part of hope. You've taken these emotions and twisted them, made them into weapons, but they're not meant to be weapons, they're meant to be teachers. The entity recoiled as if struck. What are you doing? I'm remembering something important, Fubuki replied. Leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and moving forward anyway. It's about acknowledging your flaws and working to overcome them. It's about accepting help from others and offering help in return. Her power reached out to each member of her team, and she felt their response, not submission, but partnership. Their combined psychic energy began to form something new, something the entity had never encountered before. No, it whispered, its form beginning to destabilize. This is not how it works. Emotions are meant to divide, to weaken, to connect, Fubuki finished. When we share our fears, they become manageable. When we share our hopes, they become achievable. When we share our strength, we become unstoppable. The combined power of the Blizzard Group, unified not by hierarchy but by genuine mutual support, struck the entity like a lance of pure light, but it wasn't destructive, it was transformative. The accumulated suffering that had fed the creature for so long was suddenly given context, meaning, connection to the living world. The pain of the hospital's former occupants was acknowledged, their stories honored, their fears given the comfort of understanding. The entity's scream shook the building, but it was not a scream of destruction, it was a scream of release. The malevolent presence that had twisted emotions into weapons dissolved, leaving behind only the natural healing sorrow of recognition and remembrance. As the hospital settled back into mundane ruin, the Blizzard group stood together in the sudden silence. The storm outside had passed, and pale sunlight filtered through the broken windows. "Is it over?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. Fubuki looked around at her team, really looked at them, seeing not just followers but friends, not just subordinates but partners. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with psychic power and everything to do with connection. "Yes," she said simply, "it's over." As they walked out of the hospital together, Eyelashes fell into step beside her. "Fubuki," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I've never followed you out of fear. I've followed you because you see the best in people, even when they can't see it themselves." She smiled, and for the first time in years it felt completely genuine. "Thank you," she said. "All of you." The whispers were gone, replaced by something far more powerful. The sound of people who trusted each other, walking together toward whatever challenge awaited them next. In the distance, City Z continued its daily routine, unaware of how close it had come to being consumed by its own accumulated despair. But in the hearts of 5 heroes, a different kind of story was beginning. One of growth, understanding, and the quiet strength that comes from facing one's fears with friends at your side. The Blizzard group had faced the Whispering Malice and emerged not just victorious but transformed.